Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui, coming to you live from Beijing. Since the opening of the Shanghai Free Trade Zone last year, the 29 square kilometer zone in the Chinese financial hub has attracted attention from all over the world. The zone recently celebrated its one-year anniversary, and while some are hailing its success, others are expressing disappointment over the pace of pledged reforms. Can the Shanghai Free Trade Zone be labeled a success at this stage, or has the new free trade zone taken China into choppy economic waters? And can the lessons of the FTZ be shared and duplicated in other parts of China? Today I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Zhang Rao, Senior Fellow of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University, and Mr. Edward Lehman, Managing Director of the Lehman, Lee & Xu law firm. But before we get started, let's take a look at this background report.
It's been more than a year since the launch of the Shanghai Free Trade Zone last September. Promising free trade, greater financial opening, and fewer government controls on business activities, this 29 square kilometer zone in the Chinese financial hub was a major move in the new leadership's efforts to deepen reforms.
We will pay special attention to the pilot area. We will support the revolution of the management system in regards to foreign investment.
So far, some 12,000 firms have been established in the free trade zone, with foreign trade reaching $122 billion in the zone's first year of operation. Xbox One, Microsoft's state-of-the-art gaming console, is a perfect example of the zone's potential. As the first project launched in the zone, Xbox finally landed in mainland China, which has instituted a ban on foreign-made consoles for nearly 15 years. The success of the pilot zone in Shanghai has given top leaders great confidence in the free trade zone model. President Xi Jinping said on Monday that the experience gained at the Shanghai Free Trade Zone can and should be duplicated in other places, quote, as soon as possible. Right now, the best two candidates of possible zones are the northern harbor city of Tianjin and China's richest province, Guangdong, in the south. We should plant these seeds in more land so that flowers will blossom and fruits be harvested as quickly as possible, she said. Among Shanghai's first trials, two significant steps include the negative list and the free trade account.
The list is a new management approach. Most of the foreign investors no longer need to wait for approval. There are more than 1,000 foreign investment companies in the free trade zone since the release of the list. Over 91.2% of them didn't go through the approval process.
The free trade account was launched by China's central bank. Like a highway, the free trade account connects the pilot area with the rest of the world. But instead of cars driving at high speeds, this highway is all about currency.
To companies inside the pilot area, the free trade account allows them to seize the chance of making investments outside the country. The account also allows foreign investment services groups to bring good products to the companies inside the pilot area.
There are many other tryouts underway, with some new ones still in the works. With more pilot areas in the future, experts say there are many reasons to believe China will unleash more development potential.
Welcome back, gentlemen. Lured by promises of free trade and greater financial openness, as well as fewer government controls on business activities, some 12,000 foreign firms, not only foreign, but Chinese firms, including more than 3,000 financial institutions, have been established in this FTZ last year, more than the number registered in the past 20 years in the area that now forms part of the FTZ. What do you think of the so-called freedom of this particular zone?
Well, I think it was a limited step forward. I think the problem was there was too much hype before it was set up. People thought there were going to be such things as capital account, convertibility and so on. This is impossible. This is like trying to make a small hole in a balloon. It won't work. If you took it for what it was done, which is to practice with certain forms of regulation, deregulation, I think it's been relatively successful. The problem was an extremely exaggerated view was given what was going to happen beforehand, primarily by people who would like it to have done something which it was never intended to do. So I think it's rather good, but limited in scope.
Perhaps, Lehman, many observers may have read too much into what we call experimental zone, and they have taken it too seriously. After all, this is the very first free trade zone, and many need to be practiced on a tentative basis. What do you think of the impact of this FTZ?
Yeah, I mean, there's this disconnect in a common or in a civil law society as opposed to a common law society where they're writing the laws, policies, and regulations. They're setting things forward. They're saying this is the way it's going to be done, and then trying for folks to try to figure out how to make those implementations. And I think that there's been a bit of a mixed review, I think, from foreign direct investment folks, even though I know the numbers look great and Waigaoqiao existed before, and this is a number that's greater than the past 20 years that was out in Waigaoqiao, which is a district of the free trade zone. But I mean, the reality of getting the mechanism to actually work has been strained, I think, and I think that the intention is in the right place, but the practicalities of dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, with us opening up businesses there, it's not everything that it's meant to be, and it's not really the problem of the government. It's just trying to get the government to be able to work in the right direction.
And gentlemen, I'm afraid the location of the FTZ brings us back to what happened in 1992 when Deng Xiaoping's fact-finding tour of Shanghai. Then it was the largest financial hub of the country. He regretted that it's a little bit too late to open Shanghai up, which should have served as the engine for the Changjiang River Delta region and its prosperity. This time around, Xi Jinping encouraged the FTZ to be copied in other parts of the country, despite the controversies, particularly those from overseas observers. What do you make of the positive tone that Xi Jinping set for the prospects of having more such free trade zones in probably Tianjin and Guangdong?
Well, I think overall there is, in general, I'm in favour of what is called the negative list. That is, that you should be allowed to do that which is not specifically prohibited, as opposed to that you can only do that which is allowed. It can be misinterpreted. I had a very funny example. I was in Moscow when they introduced negative principle, and they forgot to ban people selling things on the main streets, as a result of which there were tens of thousands of people through the centre of Moscow selling cigarettes and so on. So there are some practical problems, but in general, reducing the amount of regulation I favour, so I think it's a relatively good step.
What do you think of the issue of a negative list? Because many are very skeptical. They say the list is still too long.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have a harder time understanding a negative list coming from common law countries in as much as when you incorporate and when you do business, you can do anything that's not prohibited. That's not required an additional license, so the scope can be as large as you want it to be. And so for people to have an understanding that there's a negative list is a more difficult one. Yeah, I mean, the negative list is been complained about, and I think that they've actually reduced the negative list from the initial group that was in the program. But I think it still needs to further paring down, no question about it. And I think that would be a positive step in the right direction. But again, once you pare that down, how do you control it? How do you manage it? How do you make things go forward? I mean, some of the things that they had, this internet was going to be apparently open at that point in time, but they weren't able to. It was open for a small period, I understand, and then they had to close that door down. So I think it's the same thing with this negative list and how to regulate and manage that.
John, do you think other parts of the country are ready and well prepared for opening up their own FTZ?
Well, yes, but I want to stress that it's very...
What does Mr. Xi Jinping want by encouraging the copy of this FTZ in other parts?
I think that what he wants to do is to move towards a situation of less rigid regulation, which in general I am in favour of. Because there is a problem, particularly dealing with countries such as China or India, which is typical of developing countries, so they have too many rules and regulations. And I think there is a desire to reduce that, and I'm rather in favour of it. The problem is that what can be done in the FTZ is rather limited. It relates to certain questions of trade and so on. There was a greatly exaggerated view, so I would think it's a good idea to spread it, but I don't think it will have a great effect on the development of the country, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think that, just to add on that, I mean, I think that the concept was, trying to get the economy moving as fast as it can. So you do away with some of the capitalization issues, which was done in the corporate law anyway. I mean, so in the companies law that was passed in May of this year, they've actually done away with capital contribution as a mandatory portion, and it can be contributed voluntarily. That was something that came out of the FTZ. There was a proposal in the FTZ before the companies law adopted it. So I see that they're moving in the right direction. the economies, we've got to allow people to incorporate, whether it's foreign companies or domestic companies, quicker and with less red tape, and then there's going to be more business happening. So I get that concept, and that's why I think he wants to duplicate this in other areas of the country.
Let's quickly do a case study, John. Sorry. The Shanghai Gold Exchange, the world's largest physical gold trading platform, opened China's domestic gold trading market to global investors on September the 18th, marking the first time offshore investors could participate in the country's spot gold market. How do you look at this gold trading platform?
Well, I worked in the gold industry for many years, so I know about this. It's very important, the spot market, but the truth is in gold trading, it's the futures market which counts. The actual spot market is a very small part of it. So again, this is a useful thing to do. China is the biggest producer of gold in the world, and sometimes it's the biggest user, sometimes India is the biggest user, they swap over. So this is useful, but there is such a huge proportion of futures compared to spot trading in gold that again, it's useful but limited in scope. I mean, for example, I think the whole comparison that was made of the free trade zone to Shenzhen with the trip of Deng Xiaoping you referred to is completely exaggerated.
Just a couple of days ago, one very famous Chinese economist said, without being identified, he doesn't want to be identified, said to me, Yang Rui, over the past 3 decades, China's economic prosperity depends on 2 factors, no more nor less. One is labor dividends, the other less government controls on business activities. So when we look at the implications of the Shanghai FTZ, do you believe what Xi Jinping wants is actually deleveraging, less control, much more deregulation, so to speak? Let me quote what John says.
Yeah, no, I mean, I see that that's the attempt, that what they've done. I mean, when you try to open up a business, you've got to go to the AIC, then you've got to go to tax code registration and business code registration, you've got to go to the tax bureau. They've consolidated, and you would run all around the city to be able to do that, or around the district. There's 16 districts in Shanghai to be able to do that. And now they put it in one place. So I think the concept is there. How it actually works on a practical basis when you're opening up a business, has it reduced it from 29 days to open up a business down to 4 days? Debatable. I mean, having walked clients through this process, but I think that they're moving in the right direction. And I think it is to get rid of some of these regulations. I think it is to allow people to open up businesses, for sure.
What makes headlines is yet another development. Now, due to the Occupy Central movement in Hong Kong, the stock connection between Shanghai and Hong Kong has been suspended endlessly. I mean, what do you think of the decision by Beijing?
Well, I have got a slightly different view on this. I frankly think that Chinese shares are an extremely bad investment, although I'm extremely optimistic about China's economy, so I don't think it makes a great deal of difference. I think that the situation was not well thought out. It is true that the continuation of the Occupy movement is making the central government concerned about doing things in Hong Kong. So that will make this situation more difficult, there's no doubt about that.
Will Hong Kong be seriously impacted?
You know, by the Occupy movement, I think there has been impact already economically.
I mean, perhaps the suspension or termination of the stock connection between Hong Kong and Beijing would be just the first major step of its kind in the very bad direction, because Hong Kong is no longer what it was. It's chaotic, full of upheavals. It does not give us the impression of a sound investment environment, and therefore there's no reason for Beijing to continue with the idea of having the stock exchange links.
Right. I mean, I think it's a prudent thing to disconnect it at this particular time. I think that their hands are full in Hong Kong, and I think that is probably the better thing to be more prudent and to go at this more thoughtfully. And this is some of the issues I think people had with the FTZ, just in general, whether to move this thing forward in a thoughtful way. And so I think the disconnection is okay. It's not a bad thing necessarily.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. With that, we come to the end of the first part of our program. When we come back after the short break, we're going to discuss what the future might hold for China's consultative democracy. And Mr. Xi Jinping said in his policy speech recently that think tanks in China must flourish, particularly the social think tanks. I mean, think tanks in the society at large. We'll be back in a few minutes. Please stay with us. Although think tanks in China are improving, they seem to have a hard time adapting to the country's rapid development. As the country looks to modernize its governance, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for a new type of think tank catered specifically for China. In the second part of today's show, I'm joined by Henry Wang Huiyao, who is the president of the Center for China and Globalization, OCCG. CGG, and Professor Jiang Ross, who is a senior fellow of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at the Lehman University, to talk about the role intellectual resources can play in governing a country and how think tanks can support the building of rule of law in China. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Why do you think Mr. Xi Jinping chose this occasion to dwell upon the importance of having think tanks with Chinese national characteristics?
Well, because I think it's necessary. I think part of the problem with China is that it's excessively modest. There's been a general view that it's a very nice personal characteristic not to brag and boast, and I agree with that. But China's underrepresented itself in the world. For example, it was greatly taken by surprise when the World Bank said that probably China will become the largest economy in the world this year in parity purchasing power terms. And I think the underselling of its economic success is extraordinary. I wrote an article called Deng Xiaoping, the world's greatest economist. And this was not meant as hyperbole, it was meant as just a statement of fact that China's the biggest economic development that has taken place in world history. It's very important for China not to have an excessively modest, nor an excessively boastful, incidentally, but have a realistic view of itself, and for that you have to do research. So I imagine this is amongst the reasons the President said it.
You mean think tanks in China should be free from overseas influence? They should have their own way of thinking. Now, Henry, what do you think of the... you've been involved in development of Chinese think tanks, and you have a long called for policies to support non-governmental think tanks.
Yeah, I think China actually for the last 30 years have been rapidly developing, and so the decision making has been really effective, sometimes in a top-down approach. And then when it's become so effective, it really needs well studied and debated and researched by think tanks, so that the policy would not have a negative impact. And of course, in the past, China has relied a lot on the government think tanks too, and of course a lot of affiliated with ministries or departments. But I think what Mr. Xi Jinping is calling now is for a diversify of the think tank, and also emphasize the role of think tank, and that's really never been emphasized in the past. I think since this new government, President Xi has actually emphasized a number of times. Since last year he was talking about think tanks, and the party 18th Congress report talked about think tank, and now again he had a special meeting for think tank. So I think it gives attaches a lot of importance to that.
Well, what's the job of a think tank? I mean, some of the think tanks only do policy research. They give policy suggestions, and then due to the sponsorship, they are very dependent on the government. They are very dependent on the sponsors. So therefore, the issue of think tanks' integrity is at the mercy of the financial support. Do you think that will somehow undermine the integrity of the think tank?
No, I think
there are two issues. First of all, what's the job of the think tank? And then the issue of integrity.
There's a very famous Chinese saying, seek truth from facts. And that's what a think tank has got to do. The first thing is to understand what is the character of reality. Right. Secondly, on the question of integrity, all think tanks in all countries are subject to influences by private companies, governments, etc., etc. I personally have been extremely impressed by the intelligence with which the Chinese authorities operate, because when they want to take a policy, they get a very wide range of views from people who would be considered very conservative in nature, very liberal, etc., etc. They don't want to be told only what they already think. That's the thing which strikes me. I know that they canvass very wide ranges of views. I don't know exactly how the decisions are taken, because I'm not a Chinese citizen, but that they get a very wide range of views, that I do know.
Well, that has a lot to do with the consultative democracy. I mean, with the flourishing of non-governmental think tanks, it seems this new generation of the Chinese CPC leadership is more liberal and ready to listen to different opinions.
Yeah, I think you have raised a very good question. The think tank actually specializes in the policy reference and policy making and policy recommendation. Otherwise, you can be called a consulting company. So I think anything to do with public policy, with the public influence, particularly to the public wildlife, that's really think tanks should do. So the challenge for think tanks now in China, as you just said, of course there's a problem of sourcing of the income. Mm-hmm. So where's the sources of those incomes? So in order to make really independent, useful opinions, I think think tanks now calling for diversified source of income, and also most importantly, I think our entrepreneurs, the business community now, in the past they are helping the Hope School, New Hope School, or rural areas, but now I think they are starting to helping the think tank and trying to donate in that area. So that's probably the future of Chinese think tanks, that will be more people from the business, from all walks of life, and trying to support think tank, and that will make think tank useful.
There are a lot of consulting firms in China, and I believe many overseas capitals want to find their way into Chinese think tanks. However, for the sake of national security, when we are looking for overseas sponsorship or whatever financial support, do you think it's a good idea? I mean, this is a question for both of you with different cultural and political backgrounds. Do you think it is a good idea to have a financial support from an overseas firm when it comes to the issue of policy research?
No, I think it should be financed by China. Mm-hmm. The resources for think tanks are very small in terms of the state budget, can well pay for all of them. I mean, when I was in Russia, I learned, and I found the same in China, there's three groups of people in the country. One is those who don't want to be Chinese, they really want to be Americans. They haven't got very much to contribute to the society. Second are patriots, but who think that there is nothing to be learned from other countries. They love their country, but unfortunately they're wrong. Mm-hmm. And there are those who are patriots who want their country to do well, but believe there are some things which can be learned from other countries. It's the third group which is the most important, but China can afford to finance those think tanks. That doesn't mean that there should be no Chinese nationals or anything working in them, but the sources of finance should come from China. That's my firm belief.
Some argue, Harry, mm-hmm. that McKinsey, for example, a consulting firm, is no longer as important as it has been because of the rise of the internet. People can enjoy easy access to different sources of information, and therefore do you think it's a lot easier today to set up a think tank in terms of the costs?
Well, I think it's partly true because I think people now are better access of sharing information. That's absolutely right. And however, those professional management, the talent, the global view, the global influence, the brand name, I think still play a lot of roles. So for think tanks, I think it's something has actually entry barriers is quite high. It's not that easy. If you have a good talent, you know the policy, you have the access to the policy making, to the government officials or the department, and also you have actually good reliable sources, and also you have to be specialized sometimes too. You cannot just be a general think tank. You have to really make an impact. If government are really smart government, you know, if they take your recommendation and also suggestions, you got to be a better solutions to the government. So I think for the think tank, it's really it's not a general consulting firm. It's really highly specialized and highly impacted, and also really for the good of the country. Also, you just mentioned the democracy helps a democratic movement as well, and then that the think tank can play as a better source of opinions, a better source of suggestions, and taking a lot of recommendations to the government. Yeah.
But still, strong suspicions linger as to whether the authorities at different levels in China are prepared to accept the role of NGO, given the negative impact of what is called the colored revolutions. Now, I believe President Vladimir Putin must have told his Chinese counterpart, look, you've got to be very careful with the colored revolution. And so think tanks that may receive mysterious funds could play controversial roles.
Well, but I think that the truth is there's ample evidence, that quite public, that one of the policies used by foreign governments is to pay money to NGOs in order to try to influence the situation in China or Russia. It's not even actually a very big secret. So I don't think that these NGOs should be used. I don't mean that there's no role for them on certain individual issues, on environment, etc., but in central think tanks, no, I don't think the money should be coming from NGOs. And I say, the money that's required for a think tank is so small in terms of China's budget that China can easily afford to pay for it itself. And as I say, it can have individuals and so on it, but I don't think they should be funded by NGOs, which are genuinely used as an attempt to influence the political situation in the country. It's not a slander, it's just the truth.
Harry, do you agree or disagree?
Well, I think that the government, of course, funding is very important. We do have a lot of think tanks funded by the government, and then that's played a very important role. But I think it should be diversified as well. Just like initially when China opens up, we have only state-owned enterprises, and then Deng Xiaoping brought in the private enterprises, all forms of enterprises. So now for the policy market, for the thinking market, it's the same rules apply. I mean, you should diversify. Of course, government think tanks should play a very important dominant role, but I think it should be supplemented by the other think tanks and other forms of opinions, so that we don't have only one voice. I really hope that when China gets to this stage now, we are making a lot of fast decisions. Should be well discussed, well debated, well researched, and then there's more think tanks. It's really good for the country and for the policy making.
Well, I'm aware of Harry's use of two words to describe the role of think tank. It's a thinking market or ideas market. Now that gives rise to a fundamental issue as to whether the think tank should only depend on sponsorship, or it should be it's a non-profit organization, but it should be run like a business entity.
Social enterprise.
Yes, social enterprise. That might be a very good phrase.
I think you need both. In the field of ideas, the fundamental principle is they should be financed from within China, not from outside China. I think that applies to every country, incidentally, not merely to China. Within that, yes, it would be good to have some which are privately funded, some which are state-funded, and some which are a combination of the two, to get a wider range of views, because money is a material thing. It influences what people said. So I've heard diversity within China.
Very quickly, Harry, when you look at the success of a think tank, what a role model, which think tank in the world do you think is very successful? It should be the role model for the similar organizations in China.
Well, I think, when we have companies, we have a company that in the developed world, we have also learned the market economy from advanced countries. So I think anything developed in the world, if it's good, we should learn. I mean, I think
you have a specific think tank.
Yeah, of course. We see a lot. Like we see Rand Corporation is doing quite well. With Brookings, we have CSIS, we have
Carnegie.
Carnegie or CAP. But of
they
course,
are all American think tanks. Thank you very much for being with us.
Okay.
Well, I'm afraid we have to come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. We've discussed the very interesting issue of think tanks in China, and particularly the role of NGOs. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. 时间到了。